most common mistake that people make that cause their investment to become their worst investment ever. Hello, fellow risk takers, and welcome to my worst investment ever. Stories of loss to keep you winning. In our community, we know that to win in investing, you must take risk. But to win big, you've got to reduce it. My name is Andrew Stotz of Stotz Investment Research, and I'm here with featured guest, me. I want to share with you what I've learned after listening to 500 stories of loss, after going through and creating 100 blog posts of those loss, and also doing now 60 interviews. This one is the 30th to be published. So, what's important about my worst investment ever podcast? The first most important thing is to understand that we create, then grow, but most importantly, protect our wealth. I like to say that we create our wealth through business and other transactions. We grow our wealth usually through the stock market, and we protect our wealth by understanding all the many risks that we could be going through. So, what I want to do is I want to review with you the 6 major mistakes that I've seen people make after doing all of these interviews. And here we have the first one, number 6. We're going to count down from number 6. Number 6 is invested in a startup company. I mean, come on. Everybody knows the odds of a startup company making it to success, true success, is tiny. Yet everybody feels excited about the opportunity of investing in a startup, myself included. In fact, someday I'll tell you my worst investment ever story because it involves a startup. But the reality is that majority of these startups fail. There's many different ways that you can fail when you invest in a startup. Number 1, we have one story that talked about how they were the only provider of capital. Therefore, every time the company ran out of money, they went to that person. We have other stories where the people that started those startup companies weren't committed. We have other stories where the people who started those startup companies were very committed, but they weren't loyal to the investors. So there's many different ways that you can fail. Now, I'd like to talk about the 5th way that you will lose your money. That is that you fail to monitor your investment. Now, this is what I've seen from many of the interviews that I've done, is that people abdicate their responsibility for their own investments. And instead, they hope and they expect that the people who are supposed to be taking care of their money are doing so correctly. But what we find in the real life is that, come on, nobody can take care of your money like you can. Ultimately, it's your responsibility. It's like getting fat and saying, hey, it wasn't my responsibility, somebody else took care of my food. Sorry, it is ultimately our responsibility to monitor our investments. So let's look at number 4. Number 4 is misplaced trust. Business and investing is built completely on trust. Think about it. A company receives some raw material from another company, and that other company trusts that they're going to pay them. Employees work in a company, and they trust that the company's going to pay them. Companies give their customers credit in the expectation that they're going to pay them. And banks lend money to companies with trust that they're going to repay. And investors invest in companies with trust that they're going to look after the interest of all shareholders. So, why would it be any different when we're investing our own money? What I've seen is the mistakes is that people tend to misplace trust into individuals or into structures, into investments that in fact they probably should have checked in more detail about, and they probably should have not trusted them. Let's talk about number 3. We're driven by emotion or flawed thinking. Now here we have, behind me, you'll see a lot of books related to behavioral finance. And what you find is when you start digging deep into behavioral finance, you find that there's things related to emotions and there's things related to flawed thinking. What I decided to do is bring these into one group because there's so much overlap. So if you're driven by emotion, the number one the number one situation in this is overconfidence. We know this is a bias that's not only applies to people in the financial world, but also people in the medical doctor's world and every other part of life. In fact, a great study that I've seen shows that 93% of people in America think that they're an above average driver. How could it be? But I bet you think you're above average. Right. It is this flawed overconfidence or flawed thinking that causes a major mistake. Let's talk about item number 2, the second most common mistake that people make that cause their investment to become their worst investment ever. And that is they fail to properly assess risk. Now, this can come in many, many different ways. In fact, it comes in a unique way for each person. But what it really comes down to is 2 things. Number 1, understanding the risk of that investment that you're making. And number 2, understanding the risk of your total portfolio. So sometimes people may make a reasonable investment in a company that they say, the risk is a bit high, but I'm okay with that. The position size that they put into that investment is huge relative to their overall portfolio. So let's just say that that investment goes down, as is possible. It could cause huge damage to the overall portfolio. Therefore, we want to look into the risk assessment of the particular project, but also the risk assessment of our overall portfolio. Now, what I advocate after talking to so many different people about loss is that we separate the idea of looking at our risk from looking at our return. Looking at our return is a very exciting part of the research process, but understanding the risk. And what does that mean? If you start to get into a situation you're thinking about investing in, it's about figuring out what are the risks. How do you do that? You look at them yourself, you talk to people that you know, you ask the people that you're investing with, and you list them out. It's even better if you list them out on a piece of paper, and then you start understanding those risks. Now, a lot of people will say, oh yeah, this risk, but it's taken care of. This risk, but it won't happen. This risk, but. Don't think that way. Think this risk, and when it happens, here's what I've done to protect myself. So failing to assess risk is number 2, and now we come to the number 1 most common mistake that causes what people think is going to be their best investment to become their worst investment, and that is fail to do their own research. One of my general rules that I've said is in the past is that don't invest in things that people contact you about. So where are you going to find your ideas? Well, the point is if anybody's calling you about an idea, there is an incentive behind that call. They're not just calling out of excitement of helping you. Usually in the world of finance, there's some sort of fee structure going on for why they're calling you. And it could be that the person calling you has done a considerable amount of research. Fine. There's many other people that will call and they'll say, I've done research, but in fact, they have not. My experience as a research analyst all my career is that most people go into investments with a very little amount of actual research into the idea. So if you want to get to a point where you no longer make terrible investments, accept the fact that you will have to do your own research. And there you have it, the 6 ways that you will lose money, and now, because you're a listener, you're not going to lose money. And that's a summary of what I've learned up until this episode. I've got many more episodes up and coming, which I look forward to talking to so many people to continue to learn on this subject. So, that finishes my stories of loss to keep you winning review of the 6 ways you will lose money.
Fellow risk takers, I'll see you on the upside.